Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Big Blue Banter Podcast. Here with myself and my co-host, Nick Turchin. Here to break down some Giants game tape. Here to break down some Giants news. It's a big, big day for Giants football. Obviously, after Saturday and Sunday's happenings, which was really incredible because, in past years, we've seen the Giants really cut down that roster on Saturday, really before 1 p.m. Last year, I remember covering this team. And by 1 p.m., the roster was in for Ben McAdoo. On Saturday, before the 4 p.m. deadline, all the news had leaked, and it didn't change for the rest of the weekend. This year, it came down all at 4 p.m., and then it changed on Sunday with 6 moves, 6 claims off waivers, the most in the NFL, by Giants general manager Dave Gettleman. We're going to tackle all those today. First, I'm going to throw it to Nick. How are you doing today, Nick?
Really good. Very fun, active day yesterday for sure, like you said, and didn't really see the 6 editions coming. We're going to get to it all, but wow, a lot of news.
Yeah, and it was a really intense day. And for myself, actually, traveling back from a wedding in Bumble, Virginia, which, by the way, back-to-back wedding weekends, not advised for anybody who enjoys their life, but you know what? Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But anyway, great wedding anyway, great people, great friends, and I had a great time celebrating, not trying to go that route because I did love the people. But all I'm saying is driving back and trying to work mobile office in the car with all that Giants news coming down was quite hectic. But, the big news of the day, there was a lot of news, and we're going to touch on it all, but the big news of the day was the decision by the New York Giants to release Davis Webb. And there were a little bit of hints if you read through into context, and the Nuggets dropped on Saturday where the Giants, for starters, kept 4 quarterbacks on their roster through the first 4 p.m. deadline, which really said a lot right there because the team was never going to enter the season with 4 quarterbacks. It was almost therefore guaranteeing one would be released or traded. There's a rumor and something I read on Twitter from, I believe it was Pat Leonard, who said that the Giants did try to trade Davis Webb, almost had a trade with the Oakland Raiders, who eventually traded for A.J. McCarron instead. Obviously, on Sunday, we found out the Giants were going to release Davis Webb, 2017 third-round pick. Obviously, you guys have heard a lot of my takes on this, but I'll just give a quick wrap-up here before throwing to Nick. For starters, you can look back on Twitter. You can search my name. I was not a fan of the pick last season when the Giants used their third-round pick. For multiple reasons, I wasn't a fan of Davis Webb as a prospect, but also I wasn't a fan of the decision-making. I don't believe that you should really be taking too many of these mid-round dart throws at quarterback. I think that just based on the success rate, and you can look up the stats. I actually do not have them handy. I wish I did. Next podcast, I promise I'll come back with them. But the stats on quarterbacks drafted in the third round or later, as far as success rate goes for winning, making the playoffs, making the Pro Bowl, and making the Super Bowl are extremely low, under 5%. So if I remember correctly. So I didn't like it from the start for that reason. But, why I think they released him yesterday has a lot to do with what me and Nick have talked about. And really, it all comes down to a trait that, often gets overlooked, I believe, by fans. And that's just mental processing. And really, mental processing is one of the most important traits a quarterback can have. And you could see it. If you've listened to any of our podcasts, we could see it too. Kyle Ouellette and even Alex Tanney, they both just work through the play a lot quicker. They get rid of the football faster. They move through their reads faster. They're not slow at processing the play behind, after the snap. And really, if you watch Davis Webb, you still saw a lot of that this preseason. Too much of it. He had his great game against the Detroit Lions. You can't take that away from him. But a lot of those plays were really well blocked as we went over. The 27-yard pass to Shepard was well blocked. Obviously, the big 40-yard completion of Russell Shepard was really a great play by Davis Webb and showed off what his upside has. But again, if you're not working through, for the Giants, they had to make a projection here because, again, don't have any regular season game tape to go with. Practices, they are what they are. You have the game tape there, but the pass rush is not coming through. The pass rush is running through the backfield after they get through. So that's different. And the preseason, as we've talked about, defensive coordinators don't really game plan against the quarterbacks and against the opposing offenses. So there wasn't enough to work with. They had to make a projection. They felt comfortable that if Eli Manning got injured, that they could turn to Alex Tanney for 1 year. 31-year-old, doesn't have much NFL experience, but he has been in multiple NFL film rooms and with multiple NFL teams. And like I said, they like how he works through his reads faster than Webb. same goes for Kyle Lauletta. But at the same time, the Lauletta decision basically came down to Lauletta or Webb long term. Giants don't expect either to play anytime soon. And I think in the end, they decided they have more trust that Lauletta can develop into the quarterback that they believe is a right fit for Pat Shurmur's scheme. And remember, as we said, Davis Webb was drafted by Jerry Reese, Ben McAdoo, and Mark Ross, and none of the three are with the organization still. So Nick, that's kind of how I see it. I think in the end it came down to long-term projection and just they didn't really like how Webb was processing the game from a mental standpoint.
Yeah, those are all. That's a really good background for the whole situation, the way it unfolded, and the only thing I would just add to that is maybe to kind of hone in on what the specific trait is. I would almost say it's almost more the ability to throw with anticipation. And what's interesting, and this is where my take from this was, although like Dan mentioned, we kind of saw this not coming by any stretch, I don't think, but we saw in the weeds how he didn't set up for the best scheme fit for Shurmur, like we talked about. We did it. I certainly think Webb was his value was rising in the eyes of the NFL because of his work with Tony Racciopi at the test center in the offseason, and you could see his footwork greatly improve throughout this preseason, not just year over year, going back to like the random tape from Cal. When I say random, meaning because it's over 3 years old. Specifically, he showed good growth in the ability to get on schedule and to throw with anticipation, but it was imperfect. There still were in the great Detroit game, he missed a lot of throws because of timing and not really recognizing the play in front of him. And then the other side of it, he actually threw some great routes as well. And so I see the growth there. And whenever you see that ability to improve or that ability to change, the only part that I question is why do it now? And some people have made why cut him now, I should say. So some people have made the great point that, hey, if you cut him now you can devote more time to Lauletta. And there's no divided practice time. There's no divided practice snaps for Alex Tanney. The guys who you want in the game potentially are behind Eli or have more practice time. But the only thing I would just say is the Giants need draft picks. The Giants need to help this turnaround by helping themselves. And the one thing I would just say is that where this is almost a little surprising for many is that why not try to market Webb better by letting him play in the last preseason game. If you want to show off a guy's talent, why not game a little bit, game the system a little bit? And we saw Lauletta make a bunch of down the field throws in the Jets game. Why not let Webb send it downfield and do what he does best, and then try to shop him? My background as a former hedge fund trader, that's like when you go to sell something, you don't just sell it for nothing. And that's just the thing that I've seen is that Gettleman wants to get things done, and that's kind of it. But in terms of maximizing value, I don't think they did that, because I do think that Webb's he basically is a rising asset, and now it's kind of like nothing, and they don't have any picks for him. And what could they really get? A guy on Twitter asked me, hey, what would you want? And I said I didn't think they would get rid of him for anything less than a 4th round pick. Just because of just my kind of guesstimation, but I do see that value there. So anyway, Dan, I'm not sure if that makes any sense, or if it's not really a great point to make now because it's after the fact. But it's just kind of funny that this he was improving, and to do it now, I don't get the timing now.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, Nick. I'm not trying to completely defend the situation. I've had my qualms with Dave Gettleman, general manager's style of managing for a long time. Obviously, I was very, very vocal about the team's what I still believe to be a very poor decision to pass on Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen for Saquon Barkley. And at the same time, this is a general manager who admitted in his post-draft press conference that he tried to trade up in round to get Will Hernandez. He almost traded back into the 1st round. He almost traded back into the 2nd round to secure Lorenzo Carter. And for that one, he took it really seriously. He said he called multiple teams trying to trade down. And again, if you look over time, with a lot of studies that have done, trading up is not a very valuable thing for general managers to do. You want to keep these assets, you want to keep these rookie contracts, as many of them as you can get, especially in the top 100 picks, because they're under contract for 4 seasons at a very cheap price against the cap. So, again, you bring up some really good points, Nick. Even though I believe that in the end, they decided Tanney over Webb because they trusted Tanney more in a game situation. And in the end, they might have not seen Webb to have a 4th round value in a trade, or even a 7th round value, because they didn't get anything for him. I believe that you're right. They could have potentially molded him into a player that could be traded. But again, Nick, it's not like they didn't try. I can guarantee you that before they traded Webb, they tried to call every single NFL team and look for a trade. That also is why he wasn't released on Saturday, and they kept 4 quarterbacks to start. Now, part of that is because Gettleman probably had a really good idea that he was going to put in some waiver claims based on the fact that he's the number 2 waiver priority, and he did. He put in 6, like we said, the league high for waiver claims. And so for that reason, there was more of an advantage to keeping 4 quarterbacks because you could just, because you knew you were going to change the roster anyway. But at the same time, I think they tried to trade Webb, and I don't think that any team was interested. Part of that is because the quarterback situation around the NFL right now, a lot of teams have young quarterbacks that have recently been drafted or added, so they might not want to take on somebody like Webb. But part of that is because, listen, the Giants had their own evaluation on Webb last year. Sure, some people on Twitter, like to talk about the tools and said, he might be a borderline first-round pick, but he kept falling and falling and falling. And finally, at the end of the 3rd round, the Giants took him. But, there's nothing to say that his fall wouldn't have continued if it weren't for the New York Giants who believed in him. And again, like I said, the old Giants regime, which really has no ties to the current organization, as we saw yesterday after the final cuts and after that roster got trimmed down. There's really not much left from the Jerry Reese era. And they, while I will agree with you 100% that Gettleman may have not got the most value out of this entire offseason as a whole, I'm just not sure that factors into the Davis Webb situation, because I think given when they released him after a full day after, almost 24 hours after the deadline, that leads me to believe they tried to trade him and that no one was really interested. And while at the same time, like you said, you bring up a great point, Nick. I mean, if you keep him on the team, while that's taking away reps from Tanny and Letta in their development, at the same time, maybe it's building value. But the very worst, I agree with. They should have played him for most of that, or for at least the first half of that 4th preseason game before, to try to build up that trade value. But, it is what it is at this point. They burned their 3rd-round pick from last season, and hopefully they don't end up burning this 4th-round pick from this season in Kyle Letta, because, like I said on Twitter yesterday, if you could do it all over for me, I'm taking Josh Rosen, or sure, this Sam Darnold, but for me, Josh Rosen. And then I'm taking Mark Walton, the Miami running back who's now in the Bengals, or John Kelly, who's looked phenomenal.
John Kelly,
somebody I talked about as somebody who should have been a 2nd and 3rd round pick. I love John Kelly's tape at Tennessee. It reminded me a lot of Kamara minus the deep speed, but everything else he had. And again, that was another guy they could have had in round 4 to pair with Wayne Gallman, who we already raved about, who we really like. So it is what it is. We have to move on from it, but agreed. It was kind of interesting that they got no value out of their 2017 3rd-round pick by releasing him. But to me, again, that's just how the market settled in. But let's move on to a different topic here, and probably their highest profile waiver claim, and that's Mario Edwards, the 2015 number 34 overall early 2nd-round draft pick, defensive end / tackle, interior defensive lineman, however you want to look at him. Played a lot of different positions with the Raiders. Here's a guy who his father played in the NFL, and yet there are some concerns about his motor that people, from what I've read, the concerns about him keeping his playing weight to where the coaches want it. And in the end, he was released by the Raiders. And to me, if you're going to claim any player from waivers, if you're going to claim a player from waivers from any team, I'm happy that it's the Raiders. The Raiders are one of my top 5 teams I would want the Giants to claim a player from, because I personally think that franchise is headed in the absolute wrong direction with John Gruden. You can go over 5-6 moves from the season that made no sense. Releasing Crabtree for Jordy, paying a 3rd-round pick for Martavius Bryant, who was entering his contract season, which for starters was terrible. Then they released him because he's not, he's somebody who, obviously doesn't have much of a passion for the game, it appears. And then through all their decisions, trading Khalil Mack, everything they've done really doesn't make much sense. Drafting Colton Miller is another example, moving Donald Penn to right tackle. So now they release Edwards, and I think that he could become a really big piece of the rotation. I think you could look at him potentially as in that 5 technique position that we envisioned originally for R.J. McIntosh, who obviously hasn't seen the field yet much for the Giants and probably won't factor into their 2018 plans. So maybe now Edwards is the guy to spell Dalvin Tomlinson at that 5 technique right defensive end, or 3 technique right defensive end position. Maybe he plays 5 tech in some downs. Maybe even nose tackle, honestly, because remember, the Giants curiously got rid of Robert Thomas and Josh Banks and have no nose tackle, at least it appears, no traditional nose tackle behind Damon Harrison. So you've seen a little bit more of Edwards. What have you seen, and where do you think you might be able to fit in on the defense?
Yeah, I think the versatility is the one angle that you bring up, which is super important for the entire roster. You see a total theme there. Anyone who can play multiple positions, I think they like that, just because Betcher gives so many different looks. And yeah, he's listed as a D, but as Dan said, he plays anywhere from 0 tech over the nose all the way out to basically 5 and 6 tech. He played a fair amount of defensive end. I didn't get the total numbers or breakdowns, and I watched 2 games plus all his sacks and all his basically tackles. What you see, good bull rush, good ability kind of earlier in the game almost to have he's got really good consistent get off. The thing that Dan brings up when which is kind of interesting is the motor factor, as well as maybe he was penalized a lot, and I didn't pull the statistics, but he had like a false start penalty from the 0 tech, which is the nose tackle position right over the ball. It's kind of something you don't see that often. That was in the New England game from last year, and so stuff like that, you just see a little bit of kind of a mixed bag. And the one thing that I really liked in terms of a fit, he had to play a lot of consecutive snaps in Oakland last year. They didn't have like a very deep defensive line, and he was coming off of a crazy hip injury from 2016, right, where he played no games. And the one thing I just saw is people kind of question his motor. What I question is, hey, he's being asked to basically go all over the defensive line and pass rush and obviously play run at the same time. And just it seemed like he needed kind of a blow in a lot of the I needed a breather in a lot of the in a few parts of the game. So I think he'll kind of benefit from the select usage in the Giants line because they're so deep as well too. I kind of see him as someone of Kerry Wynn's size because he's about 280 pounds and he has had some issues kind of with that weight and kind of keeping that where it is so he can be fast enough. But he wins in a lot of agility ways, side to side. He's got real good speed almost, and the ability to kind of to beat guards, especially with speed to the sideline or laterally, I should say. But I would see him as like a Kerry Wynn on steroids almost because he has a better power rush, a better bull rush. And so, but I wouldn't put him at the Kareem Martin level where he can consistently play long and really kind of drive big tackles back to the quarterback. So he's right in between there, which is a good kind of spot for the Giants, I think, for someone who, even when Josh Morrow comes back in Week 5, I think that he can get some good reps in as well and win in a different way than Morrow, who's more of a bigger player, a little bit more stout, and almost kind of wins in more of a straight line way going to the quarterback. So I think it's a good pickup and something that is although it's another defensive lineman because there's so many defensive line, and we've had basically guys like Avery Moss got cut and then signed to the practice squad. So you're seeing that it's more depth to an area where they have a lot of depth. I think it's real important for them going forward.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Nick, I look into Edwards more and more, and I just don't understand why the Raiders released him. Like you said, this injury in 2016 seems to be playing too big of a factor for them because you look at the Pro Football Focus grades at least, and he's been really good against the run his entire career. His rookie season was his best season by far, where he was best against the run. He's a sure tackler according to their grades, and obviously it fell off a little bit last season. And the Raiders asked him to do a lot, to rush the passer a lot fewer snaps last season than they did during his rookie 2015 season, which was still his best season by far. But he still ended up with 4 sacks scored in Pro Football Focus, and a combination of just under 30 sacks, hits, and quarterback hurries combined. But I think, based on what I've seen, at least from the grades and little I've seen now from rewatching what I can find of him, and I'm waiting to hear obviously more from you, I think the Giants got themselves a really good prospect here. This was also, remember, Edwards was rated the #1 prospect in the entire nation out of high school and started that that freshman season at Florida State replacing Tank Carradine and was pretty damn good in his freshman year. He was USA Today Defensive Player of the Year. His dad played in the NFL. I think that there has been a lot made, like you said, of his motor or whatnot, and obviously his conditioning desire were something that came up in his draft during his pre-draft process. But I'm not sure that that's, like you said, I'm not sure that's actually accurate to what I think. It's sometimes people get labeled with these narratives and they tend to stick with them, whether right or wrong. So again, I'm definitely, because I know you haven't seen it much. A lot of people I've talked to have watched a lot of him so far, haven't seen it as well as much as people are making out to be. So I'm interested to see once you get a further look on him if those narratives are even really, if the motor and the lack of conditioning, whatever, desire narrative, or even, relative and actually factual. I'm interested to see that because I haven't seen it, and I think he could be a really nice part of this rotation for the Giants, and he's certainly really cheap still on that rookie deal. So I'm excited for Edwards here. Moving on a little bit, I want to talk about a few of the biggest roster surprises, but first I want to fill out kind of some of the other moves that the Giants made from the end of the day, and to see if you kind of thought any of them were interesting, Nick. So one of the biggest moves aside from Edwards was the decision to get rid of punt returner Hunter Sharp. As I obviously talked about on the last podcast, I don't think you could trust him based on, what he put together as a receiver this preseason. So, and I don't think the guy they signed in his place is going to play much receiver, but I think they believe he could be a big time returner. And that's Kalen Clay, most recently with the Bills, but obviously the Giants got their first eye on him when he was with the Carolina Panthers and Dave Gettleman was there. Do you have anything to add on Clay? Do you think that he'll probably seamlessly kind of work into that punt returner role?
I think, I haven't broken down the tape, but that's what most of the reports basically say. And this comes down to, you hit the nail on the head with Gettleman's comfortability factor, and with Gettleman comes all of Gettleman's people and all their research that they've done from the scouting perspective. So I get that side of it. The one thing that I will say is I got to stick up for Khalif Raymond. I mean, I think that although he's more of a gamble, I think that his upside from a wide receiver perspective, the traits that he showed there, I actually like him above both of those two players for what he showed this preseason in camp. So not to go over in a full deep dive there, but that was my take, was in terms of cutting Sharp, taking Clay, I actually liked Raymond better than all three. So who knows where that'll go. And like you said, there are many special teamers on here that could jump into punt return and kick return role. So Clay will be there obviously, but there are other guys too. It's not like he's the end all. So definitely roster flexibility there, and overall an interesting move.
Yeah, and then in addition to Clay, Giants also added they had center Spencer Pulley, who actually started all 16 games for the Chargers last season. Didn't exactly grade out too well according to Pro Football Focus, but I think that he could be a nice depth piece for them and somebody who can provide insurance now that they traded away Brett Jones to create that cap space and get that 7th round pick back. And then they added 3 defensive backs who are relatively unknown for the most part. Antonio Hamilton comes from the Oakland Raiders. Michael Jordan, or Mike Jordan, comes from the Browns. And then Cameron Moore is actually the most interesting to me because he was a 6th round pick from this draft, in 2018 NFL draft. Saints tried to convert him to safety, played cornerback in college. We'll see what the Giants envision his role being. But I think it's really interesting because he was draft pick this year, so it means clearly, and the Giants, remember, didn't have a 6th or 7th round draft pick in this draft class, so maybe they had a really high grade on him and just didn't have an opportunity to get him. Have you seen anything from them, or do you have anything to add on those 3 players that might be interesting?
Really don't. I won't lie. I did not. I was spending so much time on the other guys as was coming through and some follow-up things. I didn't get to those guys yet. The one thing, though, I think that Hamilton was a little interesting just because of his versatility at South Carolina State from what I read, and another Oakland Raider. But besides that, no, not too much.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this because I've just looked briefly into how they looked, how they graded out from Pro Football Focus. Mike Jordan's probably the one that would really interest me the most. Obviously, came into the NFL as an undrafted free agent with the Rams, but over his 2 seasons so far, he hasn't played that many snaps. He's been in coverage for 256 snaps in total. But he's had pretty solid grades from Pro Football Focus in pass coverage. And last season, he only allowed 52.4% of targets to turn into receptions. He was targeted 21 times, allowed just 11 receptions, had 3 pass breakups. And the year before, similar numbers, and he had 2 pass breakups. So really, I think he could be someone interesting. All these guys kind of fit the same bill that Giants have looked for this offseason. Lengthy, 6'1" or 6 foot, to about 200 pounds, between 190 and 200 pounds. Probably they're looking for guys who can play more press man, obviously based on James Betcher's scheme. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I would say keep an eye on Michael Jordan because he's someone or Mike Jordan, I don't even know what he goes.
Yeah, how do you say it?
Find that out. But he's someone that really has been pretty solid so far. And then let's talk about some of the cuts because not just Webb, there was another surprising cut, at least to some people. not necessarily myself, because I actually wrote an article on Friday about 10 players I think could be surprise cuts, and 7 of them I actually nailed, so kudos to me. Just a quick humble brag. But one of them was, in addition to some of the others we mentioned, was Gerald Adams, the tight end, who really, to me, got on my radar as a potential cut when I saw him playing in that 4th preseason game. Had a massive drop on 3rd down, has had mental errors in the past that have haunted him against the Lions, or I believe it was either the Lions or Jets. We saw Pat Shurmur kind of ream him out on the sideline, something we didn't really see from Shurmur with any of the players this preseason, at least not publicly. And, Rhett Ellison, actually, when I spoke with Rhett Ellison earlier in training camp, he was really high on Adams. And Adams looked to make some plays at training camp, has that huge body where he should really be a good blocker, and he has the speed. But I think for Adams, what happened in the end was that he just never could put it all together. He can never stop blowing the mental assignments that really draw the ire of the coaching staff. And in the past, with Jerry Reese as the general manager, he's willing to give him more of a leash because he drafted him, because he saw the upside, and Reese was a big believer in players with upside eventually realizing their potential. But the Giants decided, hey, it's the 3rd year, he's still making all these mental errors. Remember, he was described as a really raw prospect out of South Carolina. And I think they decided to just move on from him. And behind him, it's a little bit weak on that depth chart, which is Scott Simonson really behind them as the 3rd tight end. And that's something that worries me a little bit, Nick, because the Giants are playing so much 12 personnel this season. What do you think about that, Nick?
Yeah, a couple of things. That's the Adams brings up a good point for what Shurmur wants to do, and we know that he's going to play 2 to 3 tight ends. 12 personnel. That's something that we talked about a lot in terms of what he wants to do. Adams is interesting. I think it really came down to his run blocking lack of ability in the run blocking, specifically in duo. You saw in the preseason game a few times. A duo is a gap blocking scheme of running play where he has to block as a backside tight end. He has to block basically a defensive end or an outside linebacker or even like a secondary member. And the issue is the problem is in duo, like the running backs often like to go cut it back and get outside, and that block failed there. And even when the running back stayed play side, he lost some blocks there too. So saw the one-on-one battles really kind of lacking there. That was kind of an issue for me in the depth of the tight end position. I look at Shane Smith, the fullback, and I think that the Giants think that he's more versatile than people would realize. I'm not saying that he's going to play tight end in line down at a 3-point stance on the line of scrimmage. Not saying that. But one thing that they did throw a lot out there in the last couple of games that I don't have the stats, but 21 personnel, which is 2 running backs, 1 tight end, with Smith as the other with Smith as the other running back, and where he often moved, and Dan pointed this out before the last podcast when we were talking. He was kind of around the line of scrimmage in a wing position, and that, in a way, although it's not the same as an inline tight end, it can function the same in a lot of the blocking schemes. And Smith can show the versatility there to be able to go back deeper in the backfield and move up into the wing position. So I think it was a little bit of a, can Smith play the position and be versatile versus the back end of the tight end depth chart. I think that's what it came down to for Adams.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you look at that puts a lot more pressure on Smith, honestly, for the season. And that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on, because after seeing what Kyle Shanahan's been able to do in San Francisco and Atlanta with the use of a fullback, and after seeing what Pat Shurmur appears to be wanting to do with the usage of a fullback this preseason, I think that's a position where the Giants can actually take advantage of. Not many teams going after that position in the NFL, and maybe looking to find someone like a Kyle Juszczyk for the 49ers did, that can really help them, in their offensive scheme. And so I'm interested to see if Smith can step into that role. I'm not as sold to Smith as maybe some others are. I haven't seen it yet translate to the NFL field, but we'll see, because that's a good point. They trust him in some of those roles, and we've seen in the preseason as he's been motioned down, he hasn't only lined up as a traditional fullback.
Right.
Then that means they don't need to keep a guy like Adams on their roster. And then moving on a little bit, I don't think any of the other releases were that surprising to me. Josh Banks, defensive lineman, I did say before I was a bit surprised they didn't keep any traditional nose tackle types behind Damon Harrison, but I was more surprised they released Robert Thomas, who to me looked to be having a productive preseason. And Damon Harrison actually got on Twitter yesterday and
backed him up.
questioned that decision to release Robert Thomas. And we'll see what happens there. I do believe the Giants probably feel like they can rotate in B.J. Hill at that nose tackle when they need to, and other players from the defensive line who they feel can maybe step in there on more obvious passing downs, and they probably won't spell. Harrison too much on the early downs. And then William Gay is a guy who was burned all training camp. The practice I went to, he was getting torched. Every other practice I followed, he was also, Sterling Shepard got the best of him over and over and over again. Sterling Shepard's a great player. We saw in the preseason, in that third preseason game against the Jets, he's going to be a lot better than people think this year. It seems like people are sleeping on him after he played through most of his entire sophomore season with a high ankle sprain, honestly. But at the same time, there's obviously an alarming sign when Gay can't keep up with him in the slot, and it just kind of looked like he was washed to me this preseason and this training camp. So I'm not surprised by that decision. John Jerry's a guy I said way earlier this offseason was almost a lock to get cut when he was practicing with the third-team offensive line. The Giants could save over $1 million by releasing him in cap space. That was a lock to me. I was surprised he even made it through the first deadline. And that's kind of it for what they did on Sunday as far as swapping out 6 players they claimed on waivers for 6 players on their roster. But I wanted to talk also a little bit about some of the surprises from the initial 53-man roster. And I think one of the biggest surprises is what the Giants did at the safety position, releasing both Darian Thompson and Andrew Adams. Now, for Thompson, he was waived injured, so that hamstring injury must be a lot more severe than we initially thought, and he cleared waivers today. So obviously no teams were very interested in Darian Thompson, the former third-round pick. Potentially another misstep by Jerry Reese in the third round. We'll find out, I guess, because he will revert to the Giants' injured reserve for now. And maybe, just maybe, he might, help them out this season. I wouldn't totally rule it out if he's placed on IR, because now the players placed on IR can return. But Adams, a guy who started 12 games during the 2016 season when Thompson got hurt, also released, and they decided to keep the undrafted rookie free agent Sean Chandler, who I was a big fan of because he stepped up really big during the rookie mini camp, and during training camp it didn't always translate to the preseason. But Nick, you've taken a deeper look into Chandler. What do you see, and do you think he's someone who can contribute right away this season or down the line, or what do you see there?
Yeah, definitely did a pretty thorough breakdown on Chandler because and this is no offense to him or to anyone who's written on him, but I had not seen anything on him until he was kept, and I didn't realize that. I literally had no idea who he was, and I hadn't watched the 2s and the 3s in the defensive side of the ball that closely in the secondary. And the other side of this, too, is how annoying is this broadcast tape? Gotta say, I'm so psyched for week 1 to get the All-22 because it's so hard to keep track of even secondary members and what everyone's doing just watching the whole play. Anyway, from my notes, he was a Temple tough owl, and I didn't realize all this. I didn't realize the background of Temple or what they are as a small, kind of a smaller size school. But all of the single digit players on their roster, those digits come for those numbers come from the coaching staff for only their toughest players. And so he was played number 3 there, 4-year starter, 5'11". Yep, 5'11", 205, so pretty good size. Played corner, started out playing corner, I believe, for 2 seasons at least, or maybe even 3. I didn't watch any of his junior year tape. Watched mostly senior year tape. Cornerback converted to safety, so had that kind of versatility that we're talking about. Really good football intelligence. He was a leader on the team. He really kind of was a director of the secondary from that level. The football intelligence extended on down to a leadership position with other players. Specifically, they've got a really good safety there who we'll hear about next year in next year's draft, Randall, who is a better strong safety. He rotated and was flexible both in high and low, so he was very comfortable around line of scrimmage, was pretty comfortable in space, in deep as the middle field safety. What I really liked was the hitting skills. He's the type of guy who when he makes tackles, you hear the pads popping no matter what. They're not ginormous hits, but they're constant, consistent pops, and just he's a football player, and pretty good coverage instincts. Mirrors larger plays well, adequate to solid twitch, solid click and close ability in zone. What we mean by that is as the ball is thrown, he can kind of react to it and jump on the wide receiver from there. So on the coverage side, he checked out. What Giants fans will like is on the tackling side, he takes aggressive angles and he likes to get downhill, but he can from the middle field. He made some game-saving tackles that you saw specifically in the bowl game against the quarterback that they played. They had a bowl game against FIU last year that they destroyed FIU in, but he played very well. So like that angle. He struggles a touch with, I would say, basically blitzing rush moves. He doesn't have that. People are immediately going to kind of ask, can he be like the unknown Matthew on the roster from that safety position down around the line of scrimmage. I don't think his blitzing rushing moves are there yet. I think his overall athletic ability is a touch low. Obviously, playing with minimal kind of level of competition the conference Temple was in, as well too. He does not have blazing speed. He ran like a high 4.5s, I want to say. So overall, you see that if a guy's going to run a go route on him, he's not going to necessarily be able to go to lock step for step, even from the safety position. So what he relies on is pretty good ball skills to basically win at the point of attack. He's not a guy who's going to. He's not basically, not to bring up an eagle, but he's not Ronald Darby there with the ability to recover from anywhere. If he gets beat, it's going to be kind of tough. But I project him to be I think he can be a backup, a very, very solid backup. And I think what they like, and this gets into Adams a touch. With Adams, he was a guy, with Andrew Adams, safety for a few years here with the Giants. You saw mental mistakes that were made that he kind of kept on making in different forms over the course of this preseason specifically. You can look at the David Njoku touchdown against the Browns. There were multiple examples. The big play, the crazy Etling touchdown on the other night, where he's kind of making mental mistakes and basically continually kind of making similar mental mistakes versus a guy like this, Chandler, who's a lot more raw, is a lot more untested basically and unknown. Both are undrafted. But I think the ability to mold a player like Chandler, who already has a lot of the, I want to say, kind of more violent ability to get downhill and the better tackling ability, coupled with good coverage skills, those two traits, although he's probably maybe not as accomplished as Adams in either, he's definitely, he has both. He has a better starting point as a younger player to be able to mold as a rookie, and I think they like that. And I think they like too, just to add in a little part of his anecdote, this is a guy who he grew up in Camden, New Jersey, and he actually was in 6 homeless shelters as a kid growing up. So one of those guys that just has his competitive toughness and his kind of will to survive is very, very high, and someone who the Giants really liked.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point there too with the mental errors that we're seeing some of the Giants safeties, because that's not, that's one of the little things that sometimes might get overlooked but play a big role in the mind of coaches. And what I really like the most about Chandler, and this was definitely a player who I was excited about when they signed after the draft, is the fact that he finished last season with the second best tackling efficiency of any safety according to Pro Football Focus. And for me, and what really is interesting about that is the fact that the Giants really struggled with tackling at that third level from the safeties and defensive backs last season with Andrew Adams, with Darian Thompson, with Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie. And that's something they wanted to. It's something they needed to fix in James Bettcher's defensive scheme, because it puts a lot more pressure on that third level to make those open field tackles to prevent big plays. And that was what I really thought always could be the defining factor for Chandler in his quest to make this roster. But what really interests me is that the Giants didn't keep William Gay. They released him. They kept Michael Thomas as the fourth of the 4 safeties, if you include Chandler as one of the 4, obviously. And Michael Thomas is not going to play that deep safety role, most likely. He is going. So that just shows they have confidence in Chandler as the only other potential deep safety, really, besides Collins, will play a little bit, but mostly be used to move around the formation, and Curtis Riley, who's a bit of an unknown. So they really like Chandler's ability, I think, in the open field to make those tackles. And he actually did run a 4.65 40-yard dash.
Got it.
Which is not great, but I think that's the most overrated thing that gets tossed around when evaluating football players, the 40-yard dash, personally. Yeah, makes a big difference for some guys. Chris Johnson obviously used that to advantage. The running back of the Titans, obviously drafted the Titans and played a bunch of places to have a long NFL career, but it doesn't always make that much of a difference to me. I think it's a safe position you could win in other ways. What is Eric Weddle running these days, do you think? Because he's one of the best safeties in the NFL. I highly doubt he's running too much faster than like a 4.55 right now. I mean, I could be wrong. But, so Chandler's also 3-time All-AAC conference selection, finished with 10 interceptions in his career, 7th most in Temple history, started as a true freshman. And like you said, very humble beginnings. Homeless shelters his whole life. At 14 years old, he had to be the man of the house, basically, because his mom was working so many jobs, and he was finding ways by babysitting and doing other things to bring home food for his family, for his sister. So Chandler is a really good story. He's a really hard worker and has some of the skills that really could translate to being an NFL player. It's not just a great story there. So definitely excited about that decision to keep him on the roster. Another big decision was to get rid of Nick Becton, a guy who you who had really good grades from Pro Football Focus this preseason, much better than Chad Wheeler's. And you actually took the time to look into his tape, and you liked what you saw from Becton too. Are you a bit surprised they kept Chad Wheeler over him?
It gets into. I charted what Dan's referring to. Is I charted every one of Becton's snaps through the first half of. Oh my God! Is it the New England game? There's been so many games I actually forget. It was the New England game. Well, I liked some things. I didn't like other things. And to basically get through it, his balance through contact, he fell down 6 times in. I think I saw like a high 29 snaps or 28 snaps from him. So to be honest, there was some things that I liked. I saw the high grades from Pro Football Focus and Pass Pro. Pass Pro was definitely his strength. Run blocking was definitely his issue, and the issue was wide ranging in run blocking from both balance through contact through combo blocks. He did not have a lot of finish, and his ability to anchor even in Pass Pro, which is his highest grade, I thought was pretty minimal. So in terms of him versus Wheeler is a player who he's kind of a mixed bag. He'll flash at times. He has some of the best get off I've seen in this entire Giants camp online, meaning at the snap he's consistently almost to the point where it looks like he's false starting a lot. He's got good initial quickness, but he finds ways to lose within that quickness. And to be honest, I don't really trust either of them to be a legitimate swing tackle. I think Wheeler probably has a little bit more potential upside going forward if you really wanted to, or not if you really want to, but as he works through as a developmental player. So I definitely think that it's something where the Giants are going to address in kind of the next couple days as a backup, like we're talking about backup swing tackle to or maybe even someone to challenge the right tackle starting position that they did not move on waivers. And so although I hear what people were saying where Becton had graded well, I didn't really totally agree with the grades or think they were as good as specifically in the run game. And then on Wheeler's side, I just don't think he's going to be it for the swing tackle position. I think there's more to come here.
Yeah, I do too, and I'm somewhat surprised they didn't claim anyone at offensive tackle on waivers, but at the same time, I'm not really that surprised. I've said this multiple times when fans have talked to me on Twitter or, via the Giants on 24/7 Sports Facebook page, and it's just a shortage. I've said this before, I'll say it again. There's a shortage of offensive tackle around the NFL. They claimed Victor Salak off waivers earlier this offseason from the Browns. He's not. He's on the practice squad now. The Giants signed him there. They're going to try to mold him. But, there's no real long-term upside there. Chad Wheeler may be the best they have. I hate to say it.
You're right.
At the swing tackle position, there's just not much to work with. If teams have offensive tackles, they're not getting rid of them because they understand that any injury, they're going to need them too. So I think that's actually a position the Giants are going to look as like a part 2 of their rebuilding plan. They weren't going to get everything done in one offseason after Jerry Reese. So I think next draft, will be where Gettleman finds his Taylor Moden, who the Carolina we found with the Panthers in I believe the 2nd or 3rd round of that draft class. And now he's going to be starting at left tackle for the Panthers over Matt Khalil, who's injured. But he's also just better at this point of his career than Matt Khalil. Moden's guy's really impressed this preseason for the Panthers. I thought I was really high on him in the draft. It looks like Gettleman found another great one there with Carolina. But again, we're going to have to wait for Gettleman to have a couple years here and draft some more offensive alignment because it's not as easy to find these guys on the free agent market. Even Patrick Omameh, who they signed to a 3-year, $15 million deal, is somebody who the jury is still out on. And I know you actually broke down Omameh in detail. So can you qualm the concerns of the Giants fans on him? Do you think that he could potentially be a lot better than people think?
Yeah, I think that this started at the end of the last podcast when we brought him up there, and I initially kind of did a little bit of a deep dive, and then went a lot further and wrote a kind of a larger piece on him. And yeah, no, I think it comes down to where you see to what value you assign to him. I project him to be basically like a solid right guard, and what solid means, and many people ask this on Twitter, like, what does that mean? Solid doesn't seem good enough. Solid means that, from a definition I was using, that he should win versus 50 to 60% of the competition he faces that are of the same talent level he is. So what that means is against the majority of 3 techs and 2 techs in terms of defensive tackles, he's going to win the majority of battles. When he faces guys like David Irving or guys with speed at the 3-tech position with real good get off, yeah, I think they're going to need to do some things along the offensive line to help him. But overall, I think the narrative still is very wrong there towards him, and guys don't really want to either correct it or really look at it in terms of the tape. And we'll see with more tape as it goes along for the first 3 or 4 weeks here. I don't see it as being the biggest problem on their line. And I think it's something where, as an internal blocker, an interior blocker, I should say, I think that they can find easier ways to help him with slides and all different types of protection schemes versus, and not to single Flowers out because he had a very good preseason, I think. But a guy like Eric Flowers, who against some matchups, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be easier for teams to attack him on the edge than it's going to be to attack Omeme at right guard.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting to watch as we go. Obviously, later this week, we're going to dive into a preview of this Jaguars-Giants game from a matchup standpoint, which I'm excited to get into because that's pretty much my favorite thing to do, break down the matchups. Obviously, if you guys have followed my work on Pro Football Focus, a lot of my columns during the season focus on the wide receiver and cornerback matchups across the board, and also the tight end slot matchups versus the linebackers. So we'll be looking into all that and a lot more this week. But, Nick, was there anything else you wanted to touch on just from the roster, the final roster, that maybe surprised you, or just anything else you wanted to dive into real quick?
No, I think we hit it all. I think it's crazy that the first week is here, right? It's like you said, now eyes are all on Jacksonville and providing breakdowns and everything there. But it's just crazy that it's almost like they should do 2 rounds of cuts. I think, I don't know. Mentally for me, I think it's hard to now assemble the team where you kind of don't have a backup swing tackle and all that. And we'll see how it goes for the next 2 weeks as they firm up the starting lineup basically through 2 games. But no, psyched to get it going and nothing else to add.
Yeah, and I would say this for those fans who are a little bit worried maybe about the backup swing tackle, the cornerback situation. Dave Gettleman after the draft said Rome wasn't built in one day.
Right.
He meant it. I mean, he's been really tweaking this roster nonstop since he got in and got accepted to this job. So I think they're going to keep looking for solutions there as they open up, and they're going to keep finding stuff to go there. So I think that'll be interesting. But like Nick said, I'm just happy to finally get back into actual NFL game action, have actual NFL game tape to look at, some stats, some trends, some matchups. It's all the stuff that I love. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the roster breakdown today, and check back in with us later this week as we break down the Giants-Jacksonville Jaguars matchup. And as always, guys, if you did enjoy the show, guys and girls, please do us a favor and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button on iTunes. Download, rate, and review us. Give us all we can get on iTunes because that's going to help us build this product out and get a lot more of these going in the future. And on that note, as I always like to end this podcast, go Giants.
I was driving through the misty rain.